We talked about east-west connections in Oregon, connecting by passenger rail, Portland, Hood River. I'm going to try to name all of them. What do we got? Hermiston, Baker City, Ontario, Nampa, Caldwell, Boise, Twin Falls, Salt Lake City. Lots of towns that right now have no passenger rail service and even no intercity bus service. So there's lots of need out there, and we're going to talk to a couple folks, both virtually and in person, about this. But I'm going to introduce our moderator, who will introduce the panelists. Jeans-Gail is the Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs for the Rail Passengers Association. So he works in DC, thinks nationally about all these issues, but he lives, I think, your normal life, right? You live here in Portland? Yeah, he's a Portlander. So he knows this issue. He understands the needs both nationally and locally. And I think he's a great moderator for this panel and to explore the challenges facing restoration of the Pioneer and also the opportunities both locally, regionally, and nationally. So Sean, I'll let you say some more about yourself and then introduce the panelists. But thank you, Sean.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you to Pinware for holding this event and making it easy for me, an easy commute. So yeah, I do government affairs for the railroad, RPA, the Rail Passengers Association. We are a national organization that represents the voice of passengers. We are over 50 years old. We actually are slightly older than Amtrak. We were around during the founding of America's Railroad. And this is an exciting panel. I'm glad we get kind of the last word before we close out the summit with the fireside chat with the mayor. This is I've been doing this for over 15 years, and this is a really interesting time to be involved in passenger rail. It's a time of a lot of uncertainty, I think, because we are in this reauthorization process. We've covered that topic a lot so far over the last 2 days. So I won't delve too deep into it. I just will say that it's a situation where I think the higher you climb, the longer you have to fall. So there's real stakes now. It's not just kind of $2 to $3 billion a year, kind of keeping Amtrak eking along. We are thinking about how we expand passenger rail for the first time in 15 years. And it's a challenge. I want to emphasize that no one has really ever tried to launch a multi-state passenger rail corridor with this many moving parts, this many states, led by state governments. When we launched corridors in the past, it was a railroad. It was a private sector company that owned the entire corridor. So I think there are governance challenges that we don't quite know the answer to. We are in the process of coming up with them, and it's a conversation between states, between Amtrak, local municipal governments, and also advocates about how we do that. And as someone who lives in Portland and used to date a woman who lived in Vancouver, Washington, I've had a lot of time to think about the failure of the Columbia River crossing, and it's hard. Multi-state cooperation for multi-billion-dollar capital projects is a challenge, and it's going to be even harder for five states. So excited to hear from our panel about the work they are doing. And my final thought before I introduce them is I just want to say this is a really critical project for the reauthorization, because so far the rail program as implemented by the IIJA has benefited the East Coast, the West Coast, and a little bit of the Chicago hub. We've seen a lot of seed money go to projects elsewhere, but if we don't get corridors in red states, this is not going to be a sustainable program over multiple reauthorization cycles. I look at the Republican senators in Idaho and Utah, and I would love to activate them through corridor development on the Pioneer. So with that, I'm gonna just introduce our panelists. We will be hearing from Matt Krabacher, who is the Eastern Oregon Vice President at Aorta. After that, we'll hear from Mike Christensen, the Executive Director at the Utah Rail Passengers Association, and also a board member for RPA. Then we'll hear from Craig Raborn, who's the Executive Director of Compass, and he'll be online. And then finally, Elaine Clegg, CEO of the Valley Regional Transit, and as of December of last year, board member on Amtrak. Thanks, Matt.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me today or hosting this event, Penwar. My name is Matt Krabacher. Like Sean said, I am the Eastern Oregon Vice President for the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates, or AORTA, as we like to call ourselves. I am a grassroots advocate. I live out in northeastern Oregon in Baker City and am a strong advocate for the restoration of the Pioneer Route. I've not been an advocate for or active in this space for very long. I got started about 2 years ago when I just found a group that was active at my local library that was trying to figure out how to get passenger rail back into Baker City because we had lost our passenger rail service in 1997, and many of our citizens want to restore that service. So I got connected with them and helped them organize a petition that we ran over one cold month of January. And it ran for a very short period of time because we wanted to deliver it to the legislative short session that was happening in February. We got 1,500 signatures in our county of 15,000 people, and which means 10% of my county signed a petition in a cold January where the citizens of Montana may recognize our weather. It was single-digit lows, and there wasn't really any major sporting events. It was just tabling outside of grocery stores. So 10% of our county is on board with this or willing to sign a petition in the middle of winter. They are excited about this as a concept for all the reasons Dan Bucks highlighted earlier today. It's healthcare access. We're a rural town. We have diminishing healthcare services. We recently lost our OBGYN and our ER. We have a large aging population that doesn't like to drive at night or in inclement weather, and weather regularly closes the major interstate that we live on. And also it's distances to things like airports and shopping of major metropolitan areas that would be incredibly nice. There's clearly a demand, even if there may not be as many people in Eastern Oregon as there is in the Willamette Valley or between Portland and Seattle. That demand is there. I heard some things yesterday indicating that ridership, people are worried ridership may not be the case, but I would ask us to consider the empire builder coming from just Spokane, Washington to Portland, Oregon. I grew up on that line. I grew up in Sandpoint, Idaho. I've ridden that a lot. It is constantly full of people. And there is a similar amount of stops and a similar population between Spokane, Washington and Portland as there is between Boise and Portland. There's actually more stops between Boise and Portland. So I think that the ridership will be there. People will want to be part of that. I think the real question is, how do we make it happen? And like Representative Mannix was saying yesterday, I think it comes down to being creative at this time with public-private partnerships, as we were just learning more about, and considering the regulation that we can alleviate or cut to allow and incentivize development in this area. In my mind, this is things like, I guess I think about growing up in North Idaho. I didn't care that our station, whether or not the station in Sandpoint was open or not. As long as I had public transit in and out of my town, I was completely happy to sit in my car waiting for that in the middle of the night, like in inclement weather, was not an issue. That we still all would show up to get on the train. The station costs to implement the new Pioneer route as projected by the FRA's long distance rail study are half of the projected cost. And if you can eliminate or consider aspects of those station costs that you don't need to do, at least initially, and in which case you can then implement service and then the station developments can follow afterwards, I think would greatly increase the chances and dramatically lower the costs for development. Let's see, where am I at? Yesterday it was mentioned, there was a $2 billion price tag that was mentioned on the implementation of the Pioneer route. And I'm assuming that that number came out of the FRA's long distance rail study. That price tag refers to the entire Seattle to Denver route. And what I would advocate for, and what seems economic to me, would be something like a Portland to Boise, Oregon footing that bill, and then Boise onto Salt Lake City being a combination of Idaho and or Utah. That would also dramatically reduce the cost from the $2 billion price tag that is incredibly speculative at this point anyway. To add this east-west service up from Salt Lake City, connecting with other rail networks out in Salt Lake City into Portland would go a long way towards really establishing Portland, Oregon as a serious transit hub and rail hub and put us on the map. It would be a feeder line into this great corridor that is developing in the Northwest along the coast. But at the moment, Portland would just be a corner of this line or just the bottom of this large line. But to add in another feeder line to bring in passengers from out east into to the coast is incredibly important and would go a long way to establishing and making a sustainable and affordable route between these states. I'm concerned that if Idaho just goes alone and does not have support from Oregon all the way to the coast, that their costs to the Idaho taxpayer will be greater than they otherwise would have needed to be, since the line itself from Boise on to Salt Lake City is not over 750 miles and would not qualify for federal assistance, which means Oregon and or Idaho and Utah would be footing the entire bill for that service. So yeah, just to sum that up, I'm clearly an advocate for Oregon collaborating with Idaho on either a CID partnership or something in the future. But I hope that at a minimum, Boise can make the leg happen to Salt Lake City, and then from there we can move on to implementing Portland to Boise. I just think it'll be more cost effective and more efficient and better service in general if it is all done at the same time. Lastly, I want to say that I really encourage our policymakers and legislative representatives to consider the long view here. I recognize money is tight right now, like there's a lot of uncertainty, as Sean alluded to. But we are living in some fairly unprecedented times given the climate crisis and change that is happening. Many of your children and grandchildren will not be living in the stable climate and stable weather and stable economics that we have enjoyed the past 20 or 30 years. And rail is an added resiliency, an added sustainable form of transit that goes a long way to ensuring that the quality of life and access to transit continues for the long term for our region. So I'll close and maybe we can move on to some questions, and I'm sure our other panelists will have more to say. But in general, to close, the Pioneer can be a huge part of economic growth, resiliency, and growth and resiliency. So I ask us all to be creative, be aspirational, and think for the long term. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. I have some slides, which hopefully they can get on the screen here. Ah, perfect. There we go. Okay. Well, let me just give you a brief introduction to Utah. We're one of the nation's fastest growing states. And between 2010 and 2020, while the US grew just over 7% as a whole, Utah actually grew at a rate about 3 times faster. And an interesting thing that was in an order from Secretary Duffy, he did mention some things about families and marriage rates and birth rates, which all of us in Utah keep pointing to as basically saying like that's us. Yeah. So we are hoping that that will qualify us for more funding in the future. Although I myself, I'm still single and childless, so I am not carrying my weight on that respect. So, but demographically, sorry. let me go back. I'll take it back for you. Utah is an interesting state because we have 75% of our 3.4 million residents that live in just 4 of our 29 counties. And over a third of our 3.4 million residents are in one county alone, in Salt Lake County. And we do have a lot of great advantages from having 2.5 million people in our metropolitan area. For example, we just went through rebuilding our terminal at our airport. So we have a beautiful airport that now serves more than 100 destinations around the world every week. And we have done a lot of transit expansion in the last couple decades. We now have more than 80 miles of commuter rail, more than 40 miles of light rail, 2 miles of streetcar, and 16 miles of bus rapid transit, with more under construction as we speak. And that does unfortunately tend to distract from the need for things like intercity passenger rail and also statewide transit. And although we did host the Olympics in 2002, and we are going to be hosting again in 2034. So we are hoping that that is something that we can use to leverage more infrastructure investment and more connections to our region. The problem that we run into is that we have a very well organized state DOT in the Utah Department of Transportation that ensures that highways are ubiquitous throughout the state. But on the other hand, we only have transit where we have transit districts. So our transit is constrained. And unfortunately, we also have very few connections going beyond transit districts and very few connections between transit districts in Utah. And I often will approach state leaders like members of the Utah legislature or people from the governor's office, and they will tell me things like, if intercity passenger rail were a good idea, UDOT would already support it. But then on the other hand, I will talk to leaders at UDOT that will say, well, our state leaders, our governor, and our legislature haven't asked UDOT to pursue intercity passenger rail as a solution. So we end up in this back and forth that is really a big blind spot for the state of Utah. And back a decade ago, as I was studying this as a grad student at the University of Utah, I came to the conclusion that Utah lacks the institutional capacity to pursue intercity passenger rail. And what I mean by that is it's basically not anyone's job in the state of Utah to focus on things like statewide transit and intercity passenger rail. And that is actually whoops, I hit the back button instead. That is the reason why I ultimately, after finishing a master's degree, I created the Utah Rail Passengers Association. And I have been approached by officials from both the FRA and Amtrak who have expressed concerns to me about how Utah has been falling behind. And so it's a long story, but earlier this year, back in February, I decided to see how Utah actually did in terms of getting federal funding from the Federal Railroad Administration on the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So I put together a spreadsheet of the almost 500 individual awards that were granted by the FRA. And after I crunched all the numbers, Utah was actually at the bottom of the list. And it wasn't because we were denied funding, it was because we just didn't apply for it. And I remember being in junior high, I actually tried to play basketball, but I was terrible at basketball. But I remember our coach telling us that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So I took this data and ended up first writing an article on it that talked about our poor performance. And I also estimate that we probably, if we had been more organized, we probably could have gotten $100 million more in federal funding. So I ended up also doing a YouTube video where I went in depth talking about what we did get and how we could have better used these opportunities. And in terms of what we're looking or what's being looked at, there is strong support from people to do projects like supporting the return of the Pioneer, which is part of the Amtrak long distance service study, which I was privileged to be a part of. And we also, Utah has also been part of 2 corridor ID applications, one for Boise to Salt Lake City and the other for Salt Lake City to Las Vegas. Unfortunately, for various reasons, neither of these applications moved forward. There also is a plan called Link Utah that has been the main idea that I've been pushing as part of the Utah Rail Passengers Association, where it definitely would not be high speed because it would be taking advantage of existing infrastructure, but it would get up to 79 miles per hour with the possibility of being increased in the future, with hopefully 3 round trips a day running from Cedar City to Logan and 3 round trips a day from Grand Junction to Logan. And the one big issue that we have in Utah is St. George down in the southwest corner is one of the fastest growing communities in the nation. And it's also one of the most populated counties in the nation to completely lack a rail connection. So that is one of the rail gaps that we really need to be focusing on. But because of Well, I point to the fact that if the Hoover app is correct, I am the only one from Utah attending this summit. I have been trying to organize funding to do a rail summit in Utah because we have struggled to actually get officials from Utah to participate in conferences like this. But I think that is probably our best bet in actually being able to get things moving in Utah. And with that, my email address is on the screen. If anyone has any questions for me, you can also, seek me out after the session. So thank you.
Next up, we will have Craig with Compass.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. And I'm going to attempt to share some slides here. Give me just a moment. Well, let's see. Now, can you tell, is that sharing the presentation or is that just sharing the slides?
Neither.
Oh, hold on.
There we go.
Is that sharing the presentation then? Okay, give me a second. Computer then chose, okay. Let's try this again. Okay, are the slides up now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so hi everyone. I really wish I could have been there. I'm Craig Raborn. I'm the executive director for Compass, and we're the metropolitan planning organization in the Boise area, Southwest Idaho. I really particularly wish I'd been able to get there. Just side note, I had been in Portland, Maine last week, and I was really looking for the opportunity for the double Portland in 1 week. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the activities that our region's been undertaking around rail recently. So we have been, we're in the process of completing what's called a planning and environmental linkage study looking at high capacity transit in our region. And the mode, and I'll talk about that in a second, but the mode that has come out on top is a rail-based mode that runs on a corridor, an existing rail corridor in our region. And so, it's sort of like the slide says, there are these two efforts, one goal. And then the important thing for us too is that this is not something that's new, that's just come up, but this is sort of where we've been working on this effort for 20 years. And I want to give credit to Elaine's agency for this image. I like this graphic, how it communicates data, but it also sort of shows how everything fits together. But our region has had proposals and plans and studies going back at least 2 decades to try to work on improving our mobility within the region, the east-west mobility within the region. And because of our geographical constraints, those are the directions that we grow in. And so it's important that we find ways, to better improve mobility. But we have also, as a region, been seeking to reconnect to the national passenger rail network. And so it's really exciting to see the work and the progress around the Pioneer Line. So I'll just talk briefly about the study that we've been undertaking. So we started with looking at 12 different ways to move the rapidly growing population of our region along that east-west corridor. And we looked at the finalists that we ended up looking at was a highway-based dedicated lane for operating a bus transit, a bus rapid transit that was more on local streets, and then what we call the Boise cutoff alignment, which is an existing rail spur off of the Union Pacific line that runs east-west through our region. Just some takeaways, they all had little bits of advantage. None of them really were bad ideas from a performance standpoint. But the cutoff rail line really was the top performing route. And I'm not going to go through, I'm not trying to explain, like why it's the preferred route, but just noting that it was, and there were a lot of reasons why it came out on top. We also conducted quite a bit of engagement. So this is a summary from our final round of engagement that just wrapped up this past summer. We ended up getting from about 2,000 total users, about 500 questionnaire respondents. And you can really see that the cutoff route, the commuter rail route, was really the one that came out on top. 80% of the respondents liked it. 92% liked the basic alignment that we were working with, and the preliminary ideas we had for how the station locations would work. So then we ended up, and that's just the same map, but getting, not showing the alternatives. And I hope it's visible there. The line's a little faint. I need to talk to my cartography folks and improve that to make this a little bit more visible. But the full picture of what we would be looking at is the two top sort of ovals that are showing on here are the pieces of the alignment that we've looked at. And so the one in the upper left portion is the existing UP main line. The area in the green oval is that Boise cutoff alignment. And so the proposed route would actually encompass both of those sections to go from the city of Caldwell on the far, it's not on the far east of our, or far west of our side, but it's, sort of the western dense part of our region, with population density, extend then through some of the key communities and then into near downtown Boise. But as we're talking about trying to connect to a potential pioneer route, it's that other portion that's on the right side that is really important to consider. So this is an additional portion of that spur line that's actually owned. It was part of UP, but it's owned now by the city of Boise. And it would also need some upgrades, but it could be reconnected so that the passenger line could then follow that general alignment instead of the more southern alignment of the current main line. So it's really important to note, and this is part of why it's kind of exciting to have this conversation today, is the commuter rail idea and the pioneer route are mutually reinforcing. Both projects rely on the same basic Union Pacific, and it's owned by Watco, is who we heard from earlier, but that corridor, meaning that upgrades to advance one of our objectives would also be able to benefit the other one as well. And the plan that we have, and it's in early stages of planning, but it involves double tracking, adding some siding, signal improvements. So making a significant series of improvements, all of which would also benefit a return of long distance Amtrak service. And then, we think that by developing the corridor concurrently or ideally together, we'd be reducing the capital costs for both projects. We'd be improving freight operations, and then we'd, find ways to leverage both the FTA funding that we can get on commuter rail and the FRA funding that we'd be able to access as we're working on intercity rail to be able to benefit both of those. So really, they both strengthen the case for doing the other one. And then I'll just talk about some of the economic and benefits for the people that use the system. A restoration of the Pioneer Line would reconnect Idaho's largest metro area to the National Rail Network. It would link that area to Boise and hopefully eventually to Portland as well. Both intercity and regional services would stimulate new construction and manufacturing jobs for our region. They'd boost tourism. They'd increase access to education and healthcare for residents across the whole Intermountain West. There's a big portion of southeast Idaho that is sort of underserved with medical services, and they'd have access through the rail system then to be able to get into our region for accessing our medical service providers. And our evaluation shows that commuter rail would serve the areas with the highest employment density and housing accessibility in the Treasure Valley. And that would support transit-oriented development, more affordable, connected communities. And I'll just note anecdotally, we heard from a number of people during our work that that they would use this system to get outside of our region as well if those options were available. Those were kind of, unsolicited comments, but still very important for us. That's the core of my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer questions when we get to the end.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. We're going to have some change of slides. And you have seen a couple of these slides already. Craig showed one and Mike showed one. But what I want to start with is, first of all, it's great to be here. 4 years ago during the pandemic, some of us got bored and decided to call a Zoom meeting. Nobody knew what that was, and 50 people showed up. And here we are today with, 100 people in this room, or there were at one time, and a growing movement around this part of the country to say, wait a minute, why did we get left out? What happened when we built our national rail system, and somehow this whole section of the United States doesn't have hardly any connection to it? And we think it's time that change. In the midst of that, I took the job as the CEO of our transit agency and got very involved and interested in the commuter rail that Craig just talked about and trying to figure out how to make that happen. And then, lo and behold, got nominated and confirmed to the Amtrak board. And I'm still drinking from the fire hose there. I've been to 5 meetings, 9 months, 10 months into it, 3 train trips into it. There's a lot to learn, but hopefully I bring a point of view that hasn't been on the board, maybe ever, certainly for a long time, not just for our region, but as a person whose background really is in advocacy and then served as an elected official and now trying to make all this happen. So you already saw this map, but if you look at the green and the orange and the purple up there in the northwest and then down into the southwest, those are places that aren't served today in the United States by any rail. None. And that's a big area of our country to not have any service. And as we got together with those 50 people on that Zoom meeting, that was the thing that was most striking to us. And it's the thing I continue to bring up today at the Amtrak board. It's true that Amtrak is very focused on the Northeast Corridor, as it should be, frankly. There's a lot of ridership on the Northeast Corridor. There's a lot of infrastructure there. But should be just as true that Amtrak should be focused on building a national network that truly serves the United States, that truly connects the US and not just parts of it. Frankly, there hasn't been the political support or the financial support to do that for many years. And over the last 4 or 5 years, that's beginning to change. I serve on a board of directors at Amtrak that is full for the first time in 2 decades. Not because Amtrak did anything wrong, but because Congress didn't do its job and confirm people. And my experience on that board so far has been amazingly positive. It's a group of people that just want to get things done, that are committed to passenger rail. And I hope we get a chance to actually make some things happen. So let's hone in here on the Pioneer Corridor, that green line. And as I talked about a little bit yesterday, I have a vision that we should at least explore the part of the orange line that goes down to Las Vegas and figure out what's the best way to serve this region There's already some service between Salt Lake and Denver. There's no service today between Salt Lake and Las Vegas. Las Vegas has become a big economic engine in our region, and would love to understand how that all works. I think Matt brought up a really, really important point. If we could do not just the section from Boise to Salt Lake, but also the section from Boise to Portland to begin with, that's already a long distance route. What that does is change the dynamic of who pays for what and how much money comes to the table. And so it, I think, definitely is worth exploring, and exploring sooner than later. I hope that the folks in Oregon can understand how important it is and work toward it. Oregon's had some challenging times the last couple of years. You've heard a little bit about it. You heard Representative McLean talk about the session that just ended, and finally at least filling the hole in the funding for the transportation department in Oregon. And as that's unfolded, there's been less appetite, I think, to talk about expansion, and especially expansion of something like passenger rail that's really been sort of out there in the ether, but not particularly well supported over the last 20 years. So I hope we get to do that. This is the fastest growing region in the country. Mike talked about Utah and how fast growing it is. It's the fastest growing state. Idaho's the next fastest growing state. Our two metro regions, Salt Lake and Boise, are the two fastest growing metro regions by percentage in the United States. You add Portland and Seattle into that mix, and you have a really dynamic group of big metro regions that could be connected. And then what this map shows, although it doesn't show Oregon, it just shows Idaho, because this is the corridor ID proposal that was put in. It also serves a group of small rural communities that really don't have access today to any kind of long distance travel. While both Twin Falls and Pocatello have an airport, there's 2 flights a day out of Pocatello. There's 1 out of Twin Falls. If you go east or west into Oregon, Pendleton still has an airport. I think it's about the same as Twin Falls and Pocatello. Nobody else has one that has commercial service until you get to Portland. So you've got a stretch of almost 800 miles with a metro region in the middle that has a good airport, where people otherwise don't have access to long distance travel. The train could be an amazing economic development tool. It could also be a tool for aging population and a young population on both ends that really don't like to travel on the roads in this region in the winter. I have a daughter who played volleyball, and there was not a high-level volleyball league in Boise at the time, so I drove her and many of her teammates once a week to Salt Lake for 10 weeks in a row in the winter for 4 years. If I never have to drive that road in the winter again, I will be a really happy person. This could do a lot of good. As you can see from this slide, there's within 100 miles of this corridor, there's 4 million people. There's 2.3 million total trips in between. There's 5 major universities with over 100,000 students, and there's 750,000 population in those 2 end areas that would be most served. This really is a connection for disadvantaged communities. And while I don't have the stats on the western end from Boise to Portland, you'd see very similar stats on that end. So it really is an amazing corridor. We know that long distance and state-supported passenger rail connect major urban areas, and they do that by serving the isolated areas in between that no longer have regional air connections. And we have intercity buses that are disappearing. Those smaller communities don't have any other way to travel. And if you can't drive or don't drive, you're stuck. The regional service that we're talking about in our region really can mitigate the congestion. We've seen that in the Salt Lake region and do a lot to serve events, serve the commute, and serve and then be connected with first mile, last mile. You saw this map already. I'll show it again. This corridor is only 33 miles long. We actually envision it to go all the way to that, what's on your right there, the 12K, 11K. So within each of those bubbles is the population and the jobs within 2 miles of that station area. 58% of the population and 68% of the jobs in our urbanized areas are within 2 miles of the station areas on this route. It's an amazing route that would serve this region very well by doing the things Craig talked about, by creating that middle section that could mitigate some of the costs for the rest of it. So as an Amtrak board member, one last thing I'd like to say, you know, in my 10 months on the board, I've noticed a lot of things already. Probably the biggest thing that I've noticed is that the United States hasn't figured out how to do rail in a way that benefits the national network, the state network, and the local network all at once. One of the things I'd like to work on, collaboration is the way I work. It's how I'm also a basketball player. And I learned that, you know, a good basketball player can do a lot on their own, but they can do a whole lot more with a really good team. And I want to build a good team that creates synergy between those 3 levels of service so that we can all benefit more. And look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you again to the panel. I think we have time for about 10 minutes worth of questions, and not seeing any hands. I'm gonna take the moderator's privilege and ask the first one. You know, as a government affairs employee, I think in very concrete terms about what is the next achievable bill. And so I would just, as a thought exercise, ask the panel if you were named dictator of transportation, what is the first thing that you would do? What's the first policy, the first bill, the first entity you would create? And I think Elaine's grabbing the mic.
Okay, I guess I'll take this first because I love this question. I would love to be queen for the day, although I don't want any more kings. So there you go. If I were the transportation czar in the United States, the first thing I'd do is create dedicated funding for rail and transit that is commensurate with highways.
Yeah, something similar. I think I'd add on to that, although I think the dedicated funding really has to come first, is a long-term plan and vision for the development of our national network that supports local networks, that is very holistic, I guess would be my goal. I feel like there's too much indecision about deciding where we're going to go, and hopefully in a day I could come up with a national plan.
Well, my first thought was if I were dictator, then why would I need policy and legislation anyway? Because I could just, yeah. But the funding's a huge part of it. I think a big part of it is I would take away all of the driver's licenses. Not just so they couldn't drive, but couldn't fly from all of the members of Congress and a whole bunch of bureaucrats, so that they would actually understand what it's like to get around without a car. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good start. But
Thanks, Craig. I'm not sure if you have anything to add there.
You know, in addition to the funding question, you know, if I were the transportation czar on something like this, I think I'd want to try to find some way that kind of bridges the way that we currently do rail policy in the country with the way that regions and states, well, regions in particular, think about planning and funding and developing transportation and infrastructure.
Great. We have a question.
Question in the Who app here from, I believe online. A fairly technical question, so I'll leave it to all of you to either choose to answer or not, and maybe I even look over at some of our resident technical experts who might know better. In the recent FRA Amtrak long distance study, there was an estimated figure of between 350 and $450 million for infrastructure improvements along the potential Pioneer Line. And the question is, does this include a complete second main track through Oregon's Blue Mountains, the LeGrand and Huntington subdivisions? And if that's not known, the follow-up question is this something that ODOT and UP can work on?
I mean, I'll give my 2 cents. And I was talking with Abe Zumwalt about this earlier today. I don't know if he has a take on it or not, but it appears to me that that is what the initial phase of the CID is about, is studying and getting clear on that. And Abe did mention earlier today, he very loudly dodged a number about like how much these things would cost, because those costs fluctuate. And frankly, this study hasn't really been done. Like that's my vague understanding.
So if I could pop in on there, one of the things that I would like to see happen either as a policy statement in the reauthorization or just a decision by Amtrak, FRA, state-supported routes and advocates, that we put together a working group and really take a look at the routes that were identified in the long distance study, both for political, financial, and other feasibility to get them done, and try to come up with some priority. We're not going to do 50. Amtrak has existed for since the 70s, and we've never expanded. We've only contracted. We're not going to expand by 15 routes anytime soon. So which ones do make sense? Which ones are financially feasible? Which ones are politically feasible? Which ones have local support along at least segments of them so that we can get started? And so I know that doesn't quite answer your question, but I think the way to get at it is to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't.
Thank you. Tom, do we have any others?
Right over here behind the post here. You can't see me.
Thank you.
You're preaching to the choir here. Folks already agree that we need to do things in terms of the rails. What I run into in my town halls are folks who agree with us, agree with that. And then I run into other folks who say that why should they be paying for somebody else's travel? They don't see, we struggle with light rail issues. We struggle with Amtrak issues. We struggle with bridge issues. I mean, I have folks who are several extremes at the times, but they are also very vocal, and they will say that they do not understand. They don't want to be paying for someone else's travel issues. That they should, as one woman said to me, well, if they need to be living in near medical facilities, they should just move to those places where those medical facilities are. It's their fault. That's what they want to do. So I'm curious about how you respond to that when you find yourself facing people who are saying they do not agree with the idea of mass either public transportation or rail or whatever. Because I happen to agree with it, but I really want to see what happens there. What sort of suggestions do you have?
Well, I'm going to jump in on that because it never ceases to amaze me how, I don't know if uninformed, but just like unaware that the general public is in the US, that driving does not pay for itself. And if we actually expected drivers to pay for the costs of driving themselves, very few people would be able to afford to drive. Uh, so I think part of it is really educating people on where the subsidies really lie, because if we were really looking holistically at what is the most cost-effective way of moving people, it would not be the system of highways that we have today, especially in urban areas. Uh, so yeah, I think that we've kind of been operating in the US under the idea that driving is essential and transit is a luxury, and we really need to flip that around, and not just on transit but also on walking and biking, because those are the real the base modes that we need to support.
If I could maybe add to that, one of the things that I've learned is that I think having different stories to tell or different ways to respond to that are really important. So to Mike's point, that's a really good point. Another way to look at the same thing is, how many people ever travel or drive and get reimbursed at the IRS mileage rate? And you go, oh my gosh, that's, right now I think it's 74 cents a mile or something approaching that. That's pretty significant. And that doesn't even price in what the infrastructure itself costs. And so, people don't realize, what that adds up to. And so that's one angle. One thing that I did, that I messaged, a few years ago, around the need for transit, was pointing out, that it serves everyone in the community. And even if you're never going to use transit, you're still getting a benefit from the other people that are using transit. So let's say you're someone who just, goes through the drive-through at Starbucks every morning on your way to the office. Well, there's a decent chance, I actually had data for this back when I worked in Las Vegas, but there's a decent chance that the barista is taking transit to get there. And so, having them be able to get there is what's making sort of your day work well, or the avoided other vehicles on the road, and being able to quantify that and the operational benefits that kind of come from that. So there's usually some kind of a story or perspective that you can respond with. It's going to be accurate, or it's going to be relevant to the person who's raising the concern.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. As one of the few people in this room, I think that's actually ridden the Pioneer, I really appreciate your efforts here. It's great. So I'm going to take this a little different direction real quick. In the context of the intercity bus programs that provide great connections to rail services, Oregon has been a pioneer with the point system. Washington State's got a great rural bus network that also connects with the Cascades. So how in this area can we begin to leverage that network in Utah and in Idaho as perhaps a baseline to begin to really get people to think about intercity rail passenger service working together with intercity bus service, because that's been disappearing. Flix has been cutting routes. Greyhound has effectively disappeared. So to provide mobility for these areas that will complement the service. So I'll throw that out there and see where it goes.
I've been thinking about this a lot. It's interesting, Jeff, in our region, because there is not the train connection, the intercity bus you would think would be really thriving. And it is across southern Idaho, but it's not from Boise to Portland. And why is that? There may be a lot of reasons. Maybe as I talk to people, they frankly rather ride on a train than ride on a bus on those longer stretches. On the other hand, I think that we've maybe undersold the opportunity for intercity bus to provide, in our region, I'll call it the last mile connection, but it'll be the last 100-mile connection in many cases. When we were doing the long distance service study, many of us tried to convince the Federal Railroad Administration that their metric that people would only ride their train if they were within 30 miles of the station was wrong. It might be right for the East Coast, it might be right for the Southeast, is wrong for our region. I used to be a Boise City Council member, and we have a regional airport, and people regularly drive 250 miles to access that regional airport. You can't tell me people won't drive 100 miles to access a train in a region that has no other way to travel. I think bus service can be that connection. I think bus service can be, we had the panel of short lines, can be the connection to the tourist area. Ron talked about the Sun Valley region, how it used to be served by rail. If we had a rail to Shoshone, Sun Valley could be served by bus today. I don't know that we'll get the rail back, but we certainly can get the bus back pretty quickly. If we have a rail to Pocatello, you can bus to Yellowstone. I can imagine many European and Asian tourists who'd much rather get on a rail in Salt Lake, go to Pocatello and get on a bus and go to Yellowstone than try to rent a car. So I think they're complementary, but I think we haven't been thinking of it, that we think of it as competition. And I hope that we can work with the motor coach providers and figure out the complementary system that will help all of us.
All right, thank you. And I think we're out of time, so another round of applause for our panel.